Hi everyone, we will wait for 5 minutes to start. Okay, we will begin soon. Just a couple of minutes more and we will begin with this panel number 2. Hi everyone, can you hear me? Yes? One minute left and we will begin. Okay, let's start. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome all to this second session, Climate Change and Gender, a Feminist Approach of the 5th Tarragona International Environmental Law Colloquium, which is jointly organized by the Tarragona Center for Environmental Law Studies, CEDAT, and the Tarragona Environmental Law Students Association, EDAD. My name is Ascencio and I'm a part of the organizing team, and today I will be the moderator of this panel. It is a great pleasure to have you all here ready to engage in discussion focused on climate change, gender, and environmental law. Before starting, I would like to give you some practical information about this panel and its structure and some simple rules that we will follow in order to help us to run this session smoothly. The agenda for this session consists in a keynote speaker presentation of 20 minutes, followed by 3 abstract presenters of 10 minutes each, and once all the expositions are done, we will proceed with a discussion session where speakers may differ in their speech and research. We ask speakers please to stick to your allocated time, and please keep the microphones and camera off while you are not speaking. Regarding the audience can make questions to question and answer section, which is on the bottom of the screen, and write please who you address the question and your name and institution. And at the end of both presentations, we will have time to discuss them. You can also use the chat to share any relevant information. And we remind you that this session will be recorded and broadcast live through Facebook. So also, I would like to remind you that we are building up a collective conclusion. So we will share a Google Drive document where we invite speakers, keynotes, and attendees to make contributions. Today's presentations, we will have outstanding speakers and researchers. As keynote, join us Professor Amanda Fadigas. Professora Fadigas holds a Bachelor of Law and PhD in Environment. She's currently an adjunct professor at the University of Girona and University Oberta de Catalunya, where she teaches environmental law. In addition, she has eventually collaborated with the postgrad program in rural extension of the Federal University of Viçosa. In recent years, she has developed a special expertise in environmental and gender issues. Her research has focused on quality research that reveals and develops the potential of this perspective for studies on sustainability, culture, vulnerability, resilient actors, participatory citizenship, local knowledge, territory, governance, and social environmental risks. Having said this, I would like to give the floor and the welcome to Dr. Amanda for the next 20 minutes. Thank you, Amanda.
Hi, thank you, Stephanie. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. So, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to attend this conference. I would like to thank all the organizers for this kindly inviting me to this important event. I believe this occasion is an ideal opportunity to reflect on the challenge of climate change and overcome inequalities, especially those caused by the condition of gender. I will share my screen now. Okay, are you seeing my presentation? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So my presentation is titled A Gender View in order to elaborate a legal framework and public policy to face the climate emergency. In which I propose to analyze if the climate policy has met the needs of women's groups. Yes, no. So let me start by focus on a brief overview on gender and climate change. Yes, okay. The Conference of the Parties has stated that parties to the UNFCCC have all recognized the importance of involving women and men equally in UNFCCC process and in the development and implementation of national climate policies that are gender responsive by establishing a dedicated agenda item under the Convention addressing issues of gender and climate change, and by including overarching text in the Paris Agreement. What does this mean? First of all, that the Conference of the Parties recognize men and women in an equal status as stakeholders. Then that is important to note how the Conference of the Parties put a very important considers as a very important thing to have climate policies, national climate policies that can be gender responsive. And finally, it has an approach about the Paris Agreement that has a very small mention about gender. And it's so important to note here that the Conference of the Parties recognize also the importance of the Paris Agreement to include a gender perspective. So one thing is what the Conference of the Parties say to us, and what I like to see in this presentation, to observe in this presentation, is that we have this, if this is really happens in the practice. So for that, I bring two main questions. The first one is, who decides? So I have many questions linked to that. That is, do we have parity between men and women in climate policy? Do we have plurality in the profile of women who participate in decision-making spaces? Then my second important question that is, what is decided? So has climate policy addressed the needs of different women's groups? Then it has observed the vulnerability factors. Also, it has considered the several dimensions of impact to women's group. And finally, it has given support to the resilient actions taken by women. With these two main questions, I bring some information to you to analyze, first of all, how data can reveal, what data can reveal about the participation of women in climate policy. Here we have a first graphic. We can see in the bars the percentage of women that have participated in the different Conference of the Parties, meetings of the Conference of the Parties, and the colors represent women that have participated as leaders in these different conferences. Here on your left, you can see the different bodies or committee of these conferences, and then the years that go since 2013 until 2019. As we can see, it's interesting to note how the women participation as a membership has not reached yet the 15%, and it means the parity in most of the committees. We have only two exceptions that we'll see later, but in general, overall, what we can see is that we have not yet the parity. Also, we can observe the blue colors represent when we have women participating as a membership, but we don't have any woman as a leader. So the year of 2013 is very interesting to note this, that only in all the different committees, we didn't have any women participating as a leader. Then we can see the year of 2016 in which things were getting a little bit better, because for the first time we can see that not only women are participating as a leader, but also we have more than one woman as a leader in a committee. Finally, the year of 2019 is too interesting, the last year, because we can see for the first time that we have an increase of women participating in the different committees. At the same time, we are seen as we not have anymore just one woman as a leader, but also more than one woman as a leader, as is the case of 3 different committees. To summarize this graphic, we can say that there are only 2 committees in which women have reached parity, that were the Paris Committee on Capacity Building and Adaptation Committee. And in 2016, half of the bodies or board had a woman in leadership, what is very interesting because as you have seen in 2013, for example, we hadn't any woman as a leader. And for the first time, there were women as leaders on a committee. Finally, in 2019, 11 out of 16 bodies or boards had at least one woman in leadership. And finally, we had the record, because we had for the first time 3 committees with women in leadership. And another graphic represents the percentage of women parties delegates per meeting. And here we can see how the countries have behaved the last year, sending women or not to their delegations. And here we can see very clear how the participation of women as party delegates have not yet reached the 40%. So as the previous case, we still have not reached the 15%, the parity. And finally, it's not possible to affirm that there is a growth trend, because it's oscillating constantly. We have a constantly fluctuation between the participation of women. For example, we can see very clear as in 2014, we have increased the women participation in the delegations. However, we had a very small decrease in 2019, for example. The last graphic is about the percentage of women head of delegations per meeting. And here is worse than the previous case, because in this case, we don't reach the 30% of women participation. So it's a very, very low rate of participation as a head of delegation. So the countries have yet a very strong homework to do in this case. Nor is it possible to affirm that there is a growth trend, because as you can see, there is a fluctuation in the participation of women as a head of delegation. But differently from the last case, what we can see is that the 8 years of 2018 and 2019, yes, we can observe a relevant decrease in women's leadership in these both years, the last 2 years. So as you can see, there's now a very clear pattern of women participation, even as a member, as a leader, as a member of delegation, as a head of delegations. Now that we know about the women participation, the different bodies of climate policy, what we will see is how gender has been included in this climate policy, if gender is being referred or not in this different climate policy. I will analyze 3 kinds of documents. The first one is are the decisions adopted at the conference of the parties. I will analyze the period since 2001 until 2019. It's almost 2 decades. And now, as you can see, the first decision that we will see is the decision 36 from the COP7 in 2001. In that moment, the conference of the parties were very worried about increase the women participation in the UNFCCC. Then, as you will see, this is a trend that is being repeated over the time, because all of the other decisions more or less are addressed on this topic, that is women participation. For example, the decision 23 in 2000 in the COP18 that has the idea to promote gender balance and improve women participation in the UNFCCC. And also decision 18 of COP20, they implemented the Lima work program on gender, inviting parties to advance gender balance. Again, COP22, decision 21, the urgent need to improve the representation. This is the words literally of the decision, urgent need. Then decision 3 of COP23, that finally has established a gender action plan. We will talk about this later, but they had established this gender action plan to try to encourage the different parties to put in practice the women participation and gender equality in their climate policies. And finally, we can see the decision 3 of COP25, the last COP, in which they had enhanced the Lima work program, that was of 2014. So now that we know more or less how the COPs, how the decisions have addressed or referred about gender, we will see the Paris Agreement, what the Paris Agreement talks about gender. And in this case, we can see that in 3 different moments, the Paris Agreement mentioned gender in the preamble, in the Article 7, and the Article 11. In the preamble, it's very interesting because when the Paris Agreement bring the gender issue to the preamble, this means that it has raised the gender issue as a fundamental topic, okay? And so in that moment, the preamble had the intention to encourage countries to respect, promote, and consider their respective obligations on gender equality, empowerment of women, and intergenerational equality. In the Article 7, the goal was to bring the parties to acknowledge that adaptation action should be gender responsive. And we know that the measures to climate change are based on mitigation and adaptation. So it's very interesting that the Article 7 is dedicated just to adaptation through a gender perspective. And then the Article 11, that's talking about the capacity building that should be gender responsive. So it's interesting also to talk about a specifically capacity building. Now, finally, we were talking about the Gender Action Plan. It's important to say that the Gender Action Plan was included as an annex in the Decision 3 of the COP23 of 2017. And it's not a document by itself, but it's a part of the Decision 3. And it's just 5 pages, more or less, in which the Gender Action Plan is explained 5 priority areas for the UNFCCC. In this case, the priority areas are 5. The first one is the capacity building, knowledge sharing and communication. So as we saw before in the Paris Agreement, this is an important thing, the capacity building. The second priority area is about gender balance and participation and women's leadership. As we can see, the women's leadership, especially into the UNFCCC, is an issue that is they are trying to improve year over year. And number 3, the coherence. I think that is important, this topic, the priority area, coherence, because in other words, the Gender Action Plan is saying that we need to do what we say. This is the coherence. And the number 4, gender responsive implementation and means of implementation. And finally, monitoring and reporting. I think that this is interesting too, because as we have seen in the different decisions of the COPs, for example, the women's participation is something that is not solved yet, and now they wanted to monitor and to report how we are improving or not this issue. So to end some conclusions, I have 3 main conclusions, and indeed most conclusions are points to discussion here. The first one is that women still don't decide in parity and plurality. In spite of the improvement that the UNFCCC has done about the women participation, what we can see is that we still don't have parity. We don't have enough women and men working together to propose measures to cope with climate change. And also, I am very worried about plurality, because it's something that I think that the Paris Agreement or other documents don't put a focus on this. And what I mean with plurality, I mean that women are not a unique collective. We are plural, and we need to be represented. Women from developed countries and in developing countries. Women from rural areas and urban areas. So in this case, I think that it's not important only to have parity in women, but this collective of women must be plural. My second conclusion is that commonly decisions taken by climate policy are generic and homogeneous. I will give you just one example. When we talk about transport, for example, the decisions about transport normally are focused on to give a financial aid to buy an electric car. And we should to ask, for example, how women are moving into the city. Do they drive or not? Do they need an electric car, or it would be better to improve the public transport? So these are the kind of questions that we need to do in order to apply a climate policy, because with generic solutions, we want to solve specific problems of groups that are marginalized and vulnerable. And finally, my third conclusion is that the lack of representation of women can affect achieving climate justice. We cannot address women issues if we don't have women participating in this process. And this will reflect in the future and nowadays in the future laws that are being built in this moment. Until now, we just have 5 countries that have commitment with to regulate the climate policy. That is France, Sweden, New Zealand, it was the last one, and also, let me see, UK and Scotland. Of these 5 countries, we just have gender mentioned in one case. That was the case of Scotland. New Zealand, for example, have mentioned about vulnerable groups, and maybe women could be included in that, okay? But it's not, we're not seeing women represented in this new regulation that are coming now. So my point of view is that we need to be much more plural and parity committees, and that because this will reflect then in the national level of climate policy. So this is all. I don't know if it was so fast. I was not counting the time. So I would like to thank your attention. And if you have any question, I will be glad to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for your illustrative presentation. You did it perfect on time, even you have some minutes left. So it doesn't matter, we will have this time for later for discuss some really relevant aspect that you mentioned. And thank you very much, because you really gave us some very important data about what's the role of women in UFCC framework, and how the gender issues has been mainstreamed into the decisions. And of course, we can see that some action has been taken, but it's not enough, no? And it's really important to that women participation. It really has an important role achieving climate justice. Okay, so now is our 3 panelists' turn, so let me introduce them. First, we have Raihanatul Jannat from the University of Eastern Finland. So I will give you the floor right now, so it's all yours. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll share my screen first. Just a second, please.
Yes, don't worry.
Okay, hi everyone, and it's really a pleasure to meet you all here. So my name is Raihanatul Jannat, and I am a doctoral researcher at the University of Eastern Finland, and also a research member of the Center for Climate Change, Energy and Environmental Law, which is a part of the UEF, the University of Eastern Finland. So basically, this is a part of my PhD project. As a whole, it explores the role of transnational law in enhancing socio-economic resilience of rural women and I do 2 case studies, which is Bangladesh and the Finnish Arctic, and through gender-based adaptation. But for this part, this is the first part of my PhD research, so I look into the relationship between gender-based adaptation and socio-economic resilience under the transnational climate regime. So as the other presenters and panelists have mentioned, of course, that climate change, it is non-discriminatory in nature, but women are affected disproportionately. And in many rural societies, for instance, in comparison to men, they have like a lesser standing, and so they're less able to cope with the changing climate. However, studies have suggested that despite these social barriers that are thrown towards them, women have been contributing to sustainable development because they primarily engaged in livelihood management and reproductive activities at the household and community levels. And they are a very important driver of change when it comes to climate change and climate adaptation efforts. So it is important that these climate adaptation efforts are influenced by factors that enhance the resilience of women. I am of the view that law can play a very important role in this. And as such, transnational law can specifically strengthen climate resilience of rural women because it highlights relationships, it can highlight relationships with gender between and around of existing regulatory frameworks and fill in any governance gaps that may exist at the moment. So before delving further into my presentation, I just wanted to focus on the concepts of gender, adaptation, and resilience. So how does these three actually make sense together or come together? So of course, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change has defined adaptation. It's a process of adjustment to the actual or expected climate and its effects. And adaptation actually tries to avoid harm or exploit beneficial opportunities that may come through impacts of climate change. However, in the UNFCCC process for a longer time now, adaptation goals are expressed in a framework of increasing resilience. And it is a common understanding that this expression of increasing resilience need to encourage considerations of social and economic factors such as gender and social status and ethnicity and groups and localities, etc. In general, it is understood that adaptation actions will reduce vulnerability of and increase the resilience of a specific group to the current and projected climate risks at the national, regional, and community levels. And gender-based adaptation seeks to integrate gender-sensitive approaches and tools for understanding and assessing impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation to climate change. And therefore, in a nutshell, it seeks to enhance climate resilience. So in that light, my research, this particular one, looks into two main questions. So it first looks into what relevant frameworks, strategies, and policies are currently in place there that address gender-based adaptation under the transnational climate regime. And secondly, it tries to understand how these regulatory frameworks affect the configuration of socioeconomic resilience of women, or specifically rural women. So to do that, I first look into, so I've divided the gender considerations at the international, at the EU level, and then at the regional level, which is the Arctic Council, because Finland's a part of the Arctic Council. Finland's a part of the Arctic. For the gender considerations at the UNFCCC, first start with the Lima work program, which came through with the at the COP20, and it calls for an implementation of all gender-related mandates by the UNFCCC Secretariat, and it advocates training and awareness for raising for delegates on gender-responsive climate policies. Next is the Paris Agreement, which came through the COP21, And the Paris Agreement actually talks about, includes gender in its preamble, and also Article 7 of the agreement itself, which specifies a gender responsive approach while focusing on adaptation policies to climate, or adaptation to climate change through enhancing adaptive capacity and resilience. And then the next one is the Gender Action Plan, which came through the COP23, and the COP25 agreed on a more enhanced gender action plan. So the Gender Action Plan aims to advance knowledge and understanding of gender responsive climate action. And also, I also wanted to mention the Women and Gender Constituency, which is an important platform for engaging on women's rights and gender equality issues under the UNFCCC. And then just look into further detail about gender-based adaptation under the international climate regime. And as I've already mentioned, so there's the Article 7 of the Paris Agreement. And adaptation communications basically are the avenues through which the parties can affirm that their adaptation measures are integrated with social policies, such as gender responsive policies. And the nationally determined contributions, or INDCs, can also play a central role in the gender-based adaptation framework because they form the implementation plans through which national governments define the level of its commitments and identifies how it will implement its obligations. So INDCs are particularly important, as that will by developing and drafting the INDCs will give the parties a chance to include gender-based adaptation into their national policies. Okay, and also looking at a more gendered approach on climate resilience in other international instruments. So there's the UN Climate Resilience Initiative, or the A2R, which engages in partnerships and to promote a common ground for climate resilience, to anticipate and reshape for sustainability, and also encourages gender-sensitive knowledge and innovation to support decisions for climate resilience. Of course, and then there's the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which promotes mechanisms that focus on women and other marginalized communities, and also establishes integral links between economic, social, and environmental development and opportunities to build climate resilience. And also the UN Women Flagship Program initiatives, which creates a cross-cutting link between gender and climate change. Next, I look into the gender considerations within the EU climate strategy. So the EU, at the EU level, they already have the commitments under the Paris Agreement, and also the EU's 7th Environmental Action Program, which at the moment is guiding European environmental policy until 2022. However, it does not make any specific mentions of gender issues, but it does prioritize objectives that safeguard the EU citizens from environment-related pressures and risks to health and well-being, and to better integrate environmental concerns into other policy areas and ensure coherence when creating new policy. And then there is the EU strategy on adaptation to climate change. This one also does not specify gender-based factors, but as a whole, it seeks to strengthen climate resilience across the EU by promoting adaptation in key vulnerable sectors. Then there's the European Parliament's resolution, which was passed on the 16th January 2018 on women, gender equality, and climate justice. And it reiterates that the Sustainable Development Goals link what the Sustainable Development Goals basically states, and they link between achieving gender equality and the achievement of these development goals. And it also talks about tackling the root causes for weaker social and economic position of women, and so as to strengthen the resilience to climate change. It also maintains that empowerment of women in rural areas specifically is critical, and also for building climate resilience. And it also calls on the Commission and its member states to safeguard these aspects in their own development policies, and include public investment plans and endorse responsible private investment using frameworks. Okay, and then of course there are global climate change alliances, projects and programs, which also create a link between gender and climate change. And I also wanted to mention that the EU itself has a number of other activities that support social development and cooperation, for instance, in the Arctic regions, while they maintain environmental regulations. But in a study by the Changing Arctic and the European Union, it has been suggested that, or recommended that the EU provide greater attention to gender issues while continuing to strengthen its focus on entrepreneurship and innovation programs in the Arctic. Okay. And then gender considerations within the Arctic Council's guiding principles can be found in the Arctic Resilience Action Framework, or the ARAF, which, sorry, am I going over time? I can't hear you, sorry.
Yeah, if you can take just 1 minute to conclude, please.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up quickly.
Okay,
so yeah, okay. So the gender considerations with the Arctic Council's guiding principles can be found with the ARAF, and then there's the Arctic Council Gender Equality in the Arctic Project. So, but concluding remarks, I mean, this is an ongoing research or work in progress. What I have realized, or what I've found up until now, is, of course, just like climate change, or the impacts of climate change differ according to region. There's no set definition of socio-economic resilience. For instance, in Bangladesh, 2 of my case studies, one of them is in Bangladesh, the other is the Finnish Arctic. In Bangladesh, climate impacts increase of rural women's socioeconomic vulnerabilities by directly impacting food security, water consumption, and livelihood. On the other hand, for instance, in the Finnish Arctic, many rural regions in the Arctic faces disproportionate outmigration of women, which in turn affects the resilience of the Arctic communities through gender imbalance, because the economic transformation of the Arctic, for the most part, focuses on male-dominated economic sectors. So what, in general, though, gender-based adaptation strategies integrate gender-sensitive approaches and tools for understanding and assessing impacts and adaptation to climate change. And these gender-based adaptation frameworks that I've mentioned so far all seek to uphold on paper and strengthen resilience of women. Whether these frameworks and strategies and policies actually enhance socioeconomic resilience of rural women in Bangladesh and in the Finnish Arctic in practice is something that I need to determine through my research, which is ongoing. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Raihanatul. Don't worry, we will have time later on for discuss for a further and deeper discussion about your research project. So now let's move forward, and now it's time to María Teresa Alemany Jordan from Universitat de Valencia. So I give you the floor, María Teresa. And just as reminder, please, you can send us your questions through the question and answer feature on Zoom. So we will wait for them. We are excited to hear and read about your questions. Okay, now it's your turn, Maria.
Hello, everybody. I'm trying to share my screen. Thank you for the presentation. I'm going.
You
Can
have,
you
yeah,
see?
yeah, do you remember, it's the, on the bottom, there's an imagine, no. Just on the bottom of your presentation, you will see, I think it's now stuck. So when you were ready, Mete.
Okay. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm going to present my topic. It's about feminist proposals to reduce the risks of gender-based violence incidents in the disaster and climate change context, and to address its consequences, supporting victims and ensuring justice. First of all, I would like to explain the link between climate change, disaster, gender, and gender-based violence. The increasing effects of climate change further increase natural disaster and disaster risks, accentuate gender inequalities, and the incidence of gender-based violence, especially against women, girls, and LGBTI population, or LGBTQIR population, as Professor Karen Morrow has shown in the other panel. All these approaches that they are discriminated, so they suffer more the effects of climate change during disaster. In addition, environmental degradation, the loss of biodiversity, and climate change tend to exacerbate existing gender inequalities and gender-based violence, affecting more disproportionately women and girls. It is important to point that it's difficult to research about gender-based violence, particularly after disasters, because gender-based violence is usually hidden and takes many forms of violence, such as domestic violence, sexual exploitation and abuse, child early marriage, and trafficking. So, also, there is a risk of gender inequality and gender-based violence during disasters and climate change. And disasters and climate change affect women and men differently. Research shows that women and girls are most vulnerable to disasters and more likely to die than men in disasters. For instance, UN Women reported at the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, women and children made up 77% of the victims in Indonesia. Besides, women are also more likely than men to experience violence. During my thesis, my PhD thesis, I studied the cases in Latin America, more about Central America, because I was working there with international organizations, and I could research about the effects of, for instance, the Hurricane Mitch in 1998, where numerous cases of rapes and femicides in urban shelters were reported in Honduras and also in other countries such as Nicaragua. Some they were not in the reports of the organizations, but were reported by women organizations. And also, as you know, in IT, after the 2010 earthquake, numerous cases of rapes, sexual violence, and survival sex were reported by a large number of organizations. During 2005, Hurricane Katrina in USA, many cases of gender-based violence were reported on the shelters, showing that it's not a question of economic development. It is an issue of gender and power relations. Researchers have found significant increases in gender-based violence in high-income countries during humanitarian crises due to climate change or other causes, such as in Canada, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and USA. And there is a risk, as I said, of gender inequality and gender-based violence during disaster. Unequal access to livelihood, property, financial resources, and decision-making power can create economic stress for entire households in times of crisis, leaving women disproportionately exposed to climate-related security risks. My colleague Carlota Garofalo in the other panel has explained very well this point, so I'm not going to insist about this kind of link between gender and climate change. But I would like to remark that the latest research about gender, climate, and security by UNEP, UN Women, UNDP, and other UN organizations from 2020 shows, for instance, that in Chad, gender-based violence and structural inequality limit the capacity of communities to adapt to climate shocks. And also that reports suggest that in Pakistan and Sierra Leone, water shortage, heat waves, and extreme weather events can create new risks of gender-based violence and deepen inequalities. So, but I don't want to insist in this point because it can be explained for other colleagues. I would like to introduce more my proposals. And my first proposals to reduce and prevent and mitigate the risks of gender-based violence during disasters and climate change during these humanitarian actions has the following topics. First, it's important to prioritizing women and girls on gender-based violence programs due to their documented greater vulnerabilities to gender-based violence, the discrimination they suffer, and their lack of safe and equitable access to humanitarian assistance. A focus more on gender equality than on gender inclusivity, because from my point of view, there is not an equivalence of violence for males and for females that can be considered in the same overall framing of violence, nor even in the case of trans and homophobic violence against LGBTIQ population. So it is important to have a necessary strategy partnership with women organizations and civil society organizations to ensure safe spaces for women, for girls during humanitarian actions, to prevent gender-based violence, to reduce gender inequality in the shelters, also during emergency situations on climate-related security risks, can create new scenarios to highlight opportunities for leadership and inclusion of women and marginalized groups in decision-making process. So we have to take the advantage of this situation of crisis and to make new proposals with a gender perspective. ensure that environment and climate-related security risks are appropriately integrated into the policy framework for women and LGBTI or LGBTIQ care population. And my second group of proposals are related with the international law and the protection of gender-based violence during disaster and climate change context. As you know, gender-based violence violates international human rights law, humanitarian law, and the principles of gender equality. Under international human rights law, acts of gender-based violence are considered violations as articulated in international conventions, particularly in the CEDAW Convention 1979 and the 1993 United Nations Declaration on the Elimination of Violence. There are also other international instruments that I'm not going to explain all of them because you already know, but they are important because they make part of the hard law, and they try to protect violence, gender-based violence for women and girls. But you have here in the slide, and I would like to insist more about the international instruments during disasters. So, the only human rights treaty that ensures the protection and safety of persons that make reference to disasters or emergency is the 2006 Convention on the Protection with Disabilities. So, Stephanie, I'm over my time. Okay. I will try to do it faster to finish. So I consider the same as we have this Convention on the Protection for Persons with Disability that have these measures for protect and safety of people from violence, from gender-based violence. This kind of instruments can be fully integrated into international instruments. This to ensure gender equality and gender-based violence. Also to promote a real inclusion of women and highlight opportunities for leadership during decision-making process. Professor Amanda and also my colleague from Finland has already explained very well and in depth how UNFCCC recognize women as an actors and influence on climate change, also in the Sendai framework from disaster risks, but is improving for instance, the participation of women as they relate, but it's important to do more about it, to promote this real inclusion of women and highlight these opportunities for leadership, and also with gender actions plans. And to finish, I think it's very important to integrate hard law and soft law in the context of climate change and gender-based violence. Because all this soft law that we have from the international organizations who works in the field, who work with the humanitarian actions, these humanitarian actors that have an ethical imperative to prevent and respond to gender-based violence in the context of climate change. So these organizations have developed different standards, guidelines, and minimum standards to prevent and mitigate and respond to gender-based violence. So all these minimum standards, that I'm not going to explain that, you can see in my presentation, all these guidelines, all these minimum standards from the different organizations, from IAS, from UNFPA, from IFCR, from UNICEF, from UNHCR. So all these standards that they are very important, but they are soft law, but they will be very relevant to integrate all this soft law with the hard law. And this integration has to be from a feminist and transformative approach including a more specific human rights component on climate change risk reduction policies, with the use of new technologies, the promotion of codes of conduct and gender plans, exemplary and dissuasive sanctions in the face of abuse and sexual exploitation during humanitarian actions for supporting victims and ensuring justice. So thank you very much for listening to me and for inviting me to this Congress.
Thank you very much, Mete. I remember you that all the presentations are available at our website. So if you want to take some information or data, you can get it from them. Okay, so let's continue. Now is the term for Gokce and Leonie Reins from Tilburg University. So I give you the floor, guys. Go ahead.
Thank you. Let us share our screen. Well, I will share my screen.
Perfect.
So we will talk about Europe's energy transition and gender equality today. Leonie is joining us from Tilburg University. Today I represent the Energy Charter Secretariat based in Brussels and the Women in Energy, Climate and Sustainability Foundation, which I will introduce shortly after Leonie's presentation. So over to you, Leonie.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this presentation blends in perfectly with what we have discussed in the afternoon session and also earlier today. So first we talked about the human rights perspective to the gender issue. Then we moved on to the climate perspective, and now we want to give you the energy perspective on this important topic. And in doing so, our analysis is twofold. I will briefly go into the conceptual level and talk about the concepts of energy and environmental justice and the concept of gender. And then Gokce will more elaborately present you our case study on the practical level, namely how the energy transition is managed at the European level and what element and role the gender question plays in there. Next slide, please, Gokce. Oh. Yes, starting with the conceptual analysis, I guess the concept of environmental justice is familiar to all of you. It doesn't need any explanation. The root of it's of an activistic nature, and it has become entrenched in the US legal system quite significantly. The Environmental Protection Agency, for example, uses this as one of their key concepts. It's an anthropogenic concept that puts the human race, if you want to put it like that, in the center of its definition. It doesn't have a specific mentioning of the gender element. But and coming back to the first keynote presentation, it reflects all people regardless of race, color, national origin or income. So this leads to the question, what about the sister concept, if you want to put it like that, energy justice, as environmental issues and energy justice are more and more becoming interlinked with the move away from fossil fuels and along to a carbon neutral or less carbon intensive energy transition. Next slide. Yeah, so again, I won't focus on the definition here. There are various definitions, but what it's true is that most of the definitions mention that it's an issue of distributional recognition and procedural justice. And in practice, women are, just as we heard in the previous presentation regarding environmental disasters, most effective also by the energy injustices when it comes to access to energy and energy poverty, for example. However, the concept of energy justice is a different background. It has an academic background, if you want to put it like that. It has been erased in academia since 2015 and promoted there, so it doesn't have the same standing as the environmental justice concept. It is also, if you want to put a less anthropogenic in the definition that the scholarship puts forward, even though it, for example, includes the intra and intergenerational equity pillar. So you could say that gender is also to be subsumized there. So what we argue in our paper is actually that the concept or framing of the gender dimension in energy justice is there implicitly, but it needs to be further fleshing out by us scholars, for example, in order to at some point maybe become of equal footing with its sister's concept of environmental justice. Also considering that, as I mentioned, and we skipped the data part because of time constraints, that women are also, when it comes to energy, the most associated or considered voices. Well, needs to be considered. They're the less considered voices. So with this, I pass on to Gokce again, who will talk more about the practical case study.
Thank you, Leonie. Indeed, we had some numbers, but we removed them for time constraints, but I guess it would actually fit well, so I'll just briefly mention, and we're happy to include it back in our slides and disseminate, but basically, currently when we look at the energy sector, we see that women represent 22% of the workforce in traditional energy sectors, so fossil fuel-based energy sector, and that number is only 10% higher in the renewable energy sector. It's higher, but it's not enough. It's 32% of the workforce. And it's quite a significant number when we think about the immense task of achieving climate neutrality in the energy sector. And then we also have data from leadership positions in roles that are related to decision making. So when we look at women in different ministries, energy ministries, energy transport, and relevant ministries, women hold 70%. Women's employment rate holds around 17% of the workforce. So there's still a lot of work to be done at the EU level. This is why I will actually start by talking about the Women in Energy, Climate and Sustainability Foundation, WECS in short. It's a public foundation that I am the head of research and academic engagement of. So we have established a foundation with a vision to build a bridge and enable building up synergies between the European gender strategy and the European Green Deal. And we do have a vision for Europe to be not only a leader in climate change, but also a global champion for unlocking female talent and leadership in the energy sector. So the foundation, through the foundation, we bring together the key stakeholders that can create change on the ground in improving gender equality and improving gender balance in the energy sector. So we work, therefore we work with academia We engage with researchers. The researchers we engage from think tanks and universities. They form the unique brain pool of the foundation. We also have we have also a partnership and cooperation with EU institutions and relevant international organizations, and they steer the strategic agenda of the foundation and set priorities. And through our engagement with the industry, we work, for instance, on developing best practices, such as in HR practices, to make sure there's equal opportunities for employment in the energy sector. So creating best practices, and also there are training opportunities for HR divisions of companies. And our cooperation with NGOs enables us to combine resources and raise awareness and outreach in the field. So this morning, I have had the pleasure of representing the WCS Foundation at the European Union Sustainable Energy Week policy conference, and I was honored to be on the same panel with the Director General of DG Energy and Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson. I wanted to reflect some of the kind of key takeaways from this session, which was registered by almost 900 people. So as an update, what is happening at the European Union level on this building the synergies between the Green Deal and the European Gender Strategy, which is established as part of the Green Deal. So they have informed us today that there's ongoing work. So there's a task force established to mainstream all the policy and legislative instruments existing and future legislative instruments to make sure that they have a gender perspective. It's an immense task. They are working on methodologies to do that, and the role of academia and science is very important. And at the WCS, we help build that bridge and connection. Within the DG Energy, so the decision-making sort of body within the European Commission on Energy Matters, they also have a equality network, and this network works towards ensuring that there's a gender balance within the institution. One important information that we also received today is that, and this is important because this data is really missing, and we've identified already in our research with Leonie as a gap, that there's a gap in up-to-date data on employment in energy, especially in the renewable sector. The European Union announced that, the Commission announced that they're working on establishing data, but this will be only available as of the work will start, let's say, in 2021. Again, research and academia could play a key role in this. An important issue that was discussed, and again, there's a clear commitment from the Director General, is to improve transparency, especially on many other areas, but also on gender pay gap, because women actually don't know the payments are obviously not transparent, and this is aimed to be improved, let's say. And indeed, the Director General, Ms. Jorgensen, confirmed that they need partnership with academia to gather data, they need networks, and they need to engage with the energy sector directly as well. And at the WCS Foundation, we work towards delivering exactly that. And especially for today's discussion, I wanted to mention a few of the initiatives that are already there, so sort of the contribution of academia to fostering the energy transition agenda while improving the gender balance, and building the synergies. So what we can say from our own sort of literature review with Leonie is that we can also confirm that there is the research on gender perspectives on the energy transition is only just emerging, but in a very pioneering study, the Stockholm Environment Institute, which I will be joining this summer, and they carried a semi-systematic review of energy transition literature. And they did indeed found that just because an energy investment is renewable, just because it is green, it doesn't mean it will be just and inclusive. Because it's not the technology, it's how the technology interacts with the society and the cultures and societal norms. That's why we need to tackle it. So it's not going to happen on its own just because an investment is green. There are also, you can have a look at the list. Again, the slides will be shared. I don't want to go through all of them, but each of these let's say pathways, research, capacity building, mentorship, they all play a key role. There are some, for instance, scholarships that are available for early and mid-career researchers offered by Lights on Women initiative of the Florence School of Regulation, with which, again, the WCS Foundation has a partnership. So we'll soon be starting podcast and article series with them. And we'll be establishing a database of women in social sciences, and especially climate, energy, and sustainable law, policy, and regulation field. That will enable us to connect with each other, but also for outside stakeholders to easily access women experts in the field. And with that, also considering the time considerations, we would like to come to our gaps and recommendations section. So Leonie, if you would like to.
Exactly. This is also our last slide and our slide, because I see Stephanie nodding.
Yeah, sorry guys, sorry.
I will make it short then. For the conceptual level, I've already pretty much gave the recommendation that we as academics also need to improve the narrative, as the anchoring points are there in the concept of energy justice, but need to be strengthened.
Indeed, and from my perspective is that we are aware that we need data, and I would like to emphasize the role of research and academia and increasing the capacity and catering for this need to make data on gender perspectives of the energy transition available. And obviously, we also need to engage with the industry to make sure that there's less, especially in the leadership, that we tackle unconscious bias in the leadership. Perhaps a little bit controversial, but quotas for employment, especially at the institutional level, in decision-making roles might be necessary with some sunset clauses. Or at least it would be good to see targets. So these are our kind of general gaps and recommendations, but we will publish a more detailed analysis in the coming weeks and months. It's an ongoing work.
Thank you very much. That was it from us.
Thank you very much. That was a really detailed explanation, and it was really, I think, this analysis from what's the role of academia in achieving justice is very important. So let's move forward to the discussion section. So we have some questions. So I will ask the audience if they want to formulate it themselves, or we have one from Laura Presiche to María Teresa. Laura, would you like to make your question, or just read it? Okay. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you to all the speakers for the fantastic presentation. I have a question for María Teresa. What do you think local authorities can do concretely to reduce the impact of environmental disaster on women? Thank you.
Okay, Stephanie, I can put the video if you can.
I will do it for you.
Okay.
Okay, I think now is.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. I think all the actions has to be with a strategic partnership with women and women organization, and as local authority is necessary a communitarian approach to develop all the projects and actions. And so if you make this communitarian approach, so local authorities can work with the women organization and can develop strategies and actions to prevent gender violence during disasters or climate change. It's important because normally when a disaster happens, there are also some knowledge about the area that only the people who live there know about this community. So if the local community and local authorities, they work together with the women organization, then this lens, this way of looking and these strategies could be improved. So I think with the link between the women, the inclusion of women in these policies, and with the and also with the communities, they can work all together and they can do many things to prevent gender-based violence.
Thank you very much, Maite. So next question is addressed to Amanda, our keynote speaker. So Beatriz Felipe asked, I would love if you could develop further on why it was especially hard to adopt a new gender action plans at COP25.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
I was writing the answer, but okay, it's okay, I can say now. So thank you, Beatriz, for your question. I think the answer is very easy, because despite almost 2 decades of trying to implement gender as a relevant issue in UNFCCC practice, they have made little progress. As I showed to you the statistics, we can see that, for example, regarding the women participation in committees or in delegations, we have seen how we didn't make enough progress in this sense. So the proposal was to address the huge gap that the UNFCCC had, not only in the participation and representation of women, but also in order to implement a gender-sensitive climate policy. I think that we had 2 main problems here. For one side, the women representativeness and participation, and for another side, that the climate policy should be gender sensitive, and this is not what we have seen nowadays. It was very interesting, all the 3 other presentations, because we can see how we can think about energy, green energy, but maybe this green energy is not inclusive about the women's needs. And also it's interesting to note that the gender action plan has not yet been implemented at all. The plan is to do so between 2020, it's this year, and 2021. But let's see how this will develop in the times of coronavirus. We don't know if this will be accomplished in between this year and the next year. And can I answer or can I comment? Someone anonymous said something in the conclusive thoughts. Can I complement this?
Yes, for sure.
Yes. I don't know who is the person. I also thank your considerations. And I will take your last part, that is making mandatory gender parity. I completely agree with your statement. I really think that we cannot wait for the willingness of politics and or decision-taking actors. Such as in the Paris Agreement, they have addressed in the preamble gender as a fundamental issue. I think that we need to boost bolder solution to solve this problem. We cannot be waiting this moment of the parity. We need to take more actions and improve our laws and regulations to make mandatory the women participation.
Okay, thank you.
I hope to have answered your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Okay, we have some questions that were already answered, but maybe we can explain further by this channel, because sometimes by writing is not the same. So Javier Francisco Arenas Ferro asks, if energy access excludes communities and families, how it is determined that women are the most affected by energy poverty? Sorry, Javier, I didn't give you the opportunity to express yourself, so I just read it. Do you want to formulate yourself, or it's okay?
Maybe we can start answering, because actually I need to leave on time because I need to put my son to bed. So,
okay.
So I think I already typed the answers. He's right. I mean, by consequence, lots of the time with the problem related to women, children are in the same position. A Forbes study, I think it was said that the women and children spend around 20 hours a week to gather biomass and things so on for cooking. So I very much take his time that by extension, his point that by extension, children are also affected by it instead of going to school and learning there. There's also one question by Laura, and she's asking which what would be most important to establish energy justice regarding to renewable energies. I think one of the key concepts is to guarantee public participation, because also those projects have an impact on the environment and on the people. They don't necessarily want to have that in their backgrounds. They are not always consulted. So I think public participation is a key element. Gokce, do you want to expand on one of those answers?
Yes, indeed. Again, research by Stockholm Environment Institute, very detailed on the subject, and they didn't look only in developing countries, so they did a comparison of Canada, Kenya, and Spain. And in most cases, when they looked at the energy project development, the stakeholder consultations, actually women were not present, and they were simply not a stakeholder in the consultations, despite the fact they were most affected. And often you need different responses, because men and women are, as they're impacted differently by climate change, they're also impacted differently by the energy transition. So also in the renewable energy sector, women might need to have a different, might need a different set of information to be more than a stakeholder consultation process. They have different needs, so they might need a different set of compensation, different set of access to land. And therefore, actually, researchers suggest that we should not only have an environmental impact assessment, but also have a gender impact assessment when developing energy projects.
Okay, thank you very much, Gokce. Okay, and I think we have last question, but it was already answered. But maybe you want to explain further, Raihanatul, about the discussion about the concept of resilience. We can hear you.
Yeah. First of all, Javier, I completely agree with you that patriarchy has been very much resilient, and we should all do something to smash patriarchy. So I'm there with you. So in the context of climate change and resilience and gender, what I understand is social, like enhancing social and economic resilience, or providing more opportunities, social and economic opportunities for women or any other gender group, specific gender group, will actually increase their adaptive capacity, where they will be able to embrace in a way or tackle impacts of climate change better. And that way, that making them resilient as a group will then, of course, as a specific gender group, will help their adaptation to climate change. So in my opinion, that is the relationship between resilience and gender. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you very much. Just last question that was already typed. This is from Francisco Camarena to Professor Mete. Francisco, would you like to turn on your camera and your microphone to make the question?
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, my question is whether the new international instruments reinforce the legal protection framework for gender. I would like to give two examples. One is the Protocol of Nagoya, protocol, which include special protection for women and local communities. And relatively recently, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. That's my question, whether the new international instruments reinforce the legal protection, or at least provide a framework for contention or litigation, or doing litigation. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that's why in the final part of my presentation, I try to insist on the integration of the soft law and the hard law, because there are many regional instruments and also international instruments. For instance, the instrument you are mentioned for people who works in rural areas. For instance, I mentioned this for disabled people. So the instruments, they exist. Sometimes they don't. There is not a specific reference for protecting people or women and girls during this kind of situations. But there are different instruments, and they are like disconnected. So it's important to integrate all together, because for a normal situation that is not related with disaster or climate change situation, we have all the international instruments and universal and regional. But for the other situations, we have different, one protocol, one from the international organization, one minimum standard. Then the different international organizations mean different minimum standards, but it's too many soft law and declarations. But I think it will be very interesting to integrate all the instruments and to apply them, to aware about them, to make the international organizations, for instance, if they work in rural areas, so to aware about this instrument, and then also to give some financial support and then implement it, So I think is what you say in your question, and you also answer, like it's important to reinforce all the legal framework for gender in regional and in international level, and all the protocols to put these financial opportunities, and then to apply in the real context when a problem happened for climate change or for a disaster or all the situations.
Okay, thank you. I think Francisco wants to reply. Would you like to add something? Okay.
Very briefly.
Yes.
That means that soft law provides the context to hard law. I mean, the soft law fill the gaps of the hard law. I mean, the UN declarations provide meanings or provide hard meanings to the hard law, such as enforceable conventions. I understand that. I don't know if you understand.
Yes, it's like, it's easier the soft law than the hard law to be approved by all the states, no? Because, for instance, think about refugees. There are different protocols from different situations, but then you have this convention for refugee, but all the soft law, all the protocols for diversity, for women, then is soft law. So if the states want, they apply, and if they don't want, it's not a convention, no? So that's why the soft law is more updated to the reality. And when I have studied the situation of disasters, I believe that the international organizations, from the experience in the field, from what happened with the real problems, they have adopted these minimum standards. So it will be important to try to integrate this soft law, and also to aware about them to the staff, and also to the staff who works in the international organization, and to the governments, because sometimes also they don't know when they have to answer a situation of crisis. So yes, I believe it's important. It's difficult, but it's important to do it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mete, for answering. Unfortunately, the time is running out, so we must close. But what is a fact is that adaptation or mitigation intervention from different sectors and perspectives cannot ignore the gender inequalities, because only deepen existing vulnerabilities and encourage new type of exclusion. So I would like to invite you to develop this idea that maybe still on your minds, the document that we shared previously. This is a document to build up collective some conclusions and some final thoughts about this this session and this event. So especially keynotes, but also attendees, I invite you to contribute with this document. I think it will be interesting to have it for later and to share it in our website and our social media, so it can reach most of the people as can. Okay, and thank you once again. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you soon, at least, especially let's hope we have the opportunity to someday meet you in person, and you are more than welcome in Tarragona. I'm pretty sure that you will be amazing with this city and also with the people. And finally, just let me thank to my colleagues and the rest of the organizing team for it helps, and also to Gaston Medici, which was the technical support behind all these sessions. So thank you very much for your attention, and see you tomorrow, please. We are looking forward to see you tomorrow, and have a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your help. Bye.
Ciao.